Welcome to Mission in 5, the podcast, where we ask 5 simple questions to pastors, ministry leaders, church members, and anyone else we can convince into coming on this podcast to learn more about who they are as people and where they see God moving in their community. Well, this is episode 9, and I am your host, Greg Mamula. Today we're speaking with Susan Howell of Lincoln, Nebraska. Susan's a Lincoln native, but she spent a good portion of her years growing up in New York. She returned to Nebraska about 25 years ago to care for her aging parents and has been here ever since. She and her husband joined First Baptist Church of Lincoln in 1994. Susan's been active with the Burmese Karen community at the First Baptist Church for the past 10 years, teaching Sunday school, attending events, and serving on the Karen Society of Nebraska Board of Directors. She has been active with our Moses Merrill Camp and Conference Center by planning and participating in various retreats and helping out with the music and drama camp. She lives in Lincoln with her husband Bob, and they just celebrated their 23rd anniversary. Susan was an accountant in her professional life and is now retired. Welcome to the show, Susan. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Greg.
Well, it's good to have you, and I'm excited to learn more about your ministry in Lincoln. The format of the show is simple enough. Just to remind everybody, we're going to ask you 5 simple questions as a ministry leader to learn more about who you are and how you see God moving in your community of First Baptist Church and anywhere else that you're doing ministry. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
All right. Well, let's dive right in. Let's do question number 1. Who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, other than what you already said in the introduction, I do teach Sunday school. I also do some Bible studies at church. I've also preached some sermons, which was something I had never expected I would do. I am really active in the church. I remember when I first joined the church, I thought, oh my, I'm not going to make the church my life. You know, I have another life. And then I discovered that I really don't, that the church is my life. And so a lot of what I do is centered around that group of people.
Yeah. So you've made a lot of friends there at the church, and a lot of your social network involves being at First Baptist there in Lincoln. Yeah,
they are kind of my extended family, yes. That's the advantage of a small church.
Yeah, being from the Lincoln area, do you still have family there?
No, not anymore. Mm-mm. They're all gone.
Okay.
They've all gone to heaven.
Well, that's good to know. Well, let's do number 2 then. How did you get here? How did you find your way from New York back to Lincoln? And then why First Baptist and as a faith community?
Right. I had grown up in a church that, I don't know how to describe it, but it was kind of like Presbyterian, but it wasn't a Presbyterian church.
Okay.
So my background was certainly not Baptist. Mm-hmm. But when I moved back to Lincoln to take care of my parents, and I met my future husband, our first date was church shopping. And so we went to various churches, and when we walked into First Baptist, Lee Spitzer was the minister there, was the pastor there.
Okay.
And I felt at home. You know, I recognized his accent. I recognized, the way he did things was how I grew up back east. And so I felt very comfortable at home there. And I felt like every sermon he spoke was to me, that I was being targeted, if you will, and I would end up in tears after each service. And so about a year after we started going there, we were baptized, and it just kind of went from there.
Wow. So just for our listeners to kind of catch up, they may not know, Lee Spitzer is the General Secretary of ABC USA currently, but in the 90s, he was pastor of First Baptist Church in Lincoln.
Yes.
And he's from New Jersey, is that right? Or Brooklyn?
New York.
Yeah,
he's from New York.
Right.
He's in New Jersey now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So he's from New York, and you grew up in New York, so that was kind of your connection there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Right. And,
absolutely. And, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about this romantic church shopping date.
We had kind of made a list of various churches in town, and we had met at St. Mark's, which is a Methodist church.
Okay.
And but we had felt we had somehow grown beyond what St. Mark's could offer us, and so we started looking, and it was kind of interesting because a couple of the churches we went to were on summer hours, and so we missed the service. Which looking back now, I realize was kind of God leading us to where He wanted us to be. And Bob had remembered First Baptist, and this is funny, remembered First Baptist because he had attended a funeral there and had been impressed by the pastor and the congregation and all of that stuff. And so we decided we'd go there. And first time we went, we never left.
Wow. Well, that's a good story. I like it. No, that's great. It's always interesting to find out how people found church homes. And so I'm glad that you've been there for a while and have made it part of your life, such a deep part of your life.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's go on to question 3 then. What moves you? Do you have any hobbies, passions, interests? Do you do things? I mean, you're pretty deeply connected to the church, but
right
within the church, is there something that excites you, or are there things, maybe other things you do in Lincoln that strike your passion?
Oh, okay. Well, outside of the church, I have gotten hooked on Ancestry.com.
Okay.
And that has been very interesting. Inside the church, I have a passion for our refugee communities. The church hosts a large Korean congregation, a Chinese congregation, and a Sudanese congregation. And it seems that God's leading me to have relationships in each one of those congregations and to help them in any way that I'm called to do.
All right, very good. Well, tell me a little bit, if you're comfortable, tell me a little bit about your ancestry studies. What are some things you've discovered about your roots?
Well, my roots I pretty much knew. I am 25% Irish, and the rest is Western European, German, Swiss, that area. But I knew that because I knew where my grandparents had originated. My husband, on the other hand, he knew nothing because his father died when he was very young, and we discovered he had a half-brother that he didn't know about. And so that was kind of exciting, and since we discovered him, we have a relationship with him, and as a matter of fact, next month we're going to meet him for a week in vacation in Texas.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And the other thing that I think is interesting is he used to be a church, the half brother, used to go to church, but he doesn't because his wife, who is, I believe, Japanese, is an atheist. And so I feel like we were called to find him for that reason, to show him that what faith can do and what God can do in your life. And so that's been a really interesting journey as well.
Yeah, you never know who God's going to bring in your life to share your life story and faith journey with. Absolutely. Yeah,
interesting.
That's a perfect segue to our next question. So what's happening at First Baptist Church? Tell us a little bit more about this refugee ministry that you're so deeply involved in. For our listeners that may not know, the Karen people are a tribal group from Burma, and many of them have immigrated to the United States. And because of our American Baptist mission work in Burma, many of them come here as Christians and as Baptists, and so they want to connect to American Baptists. And then you also have Chinese and Sudanese groups that aren't necessarily connected with the Baptist tradition, but are worshiping at First Baptist. So tell us a little bit about this and how it came about and how the church is partnered with these groups.
Well, initially, for the Karen, we sponsored one family. It was a woman and I believe 2 or 3 sons who came, And so we found them an apartment, got them furniture, did all that stuff. And through that one family, we now have a congregation on Sunday morning that's probably around 250 to 300 people,
wow.
Korean descent, who come to our church.
That's amazing.
And yeah, I know. And through that, at the time I was teaching Sunday school. I still am, but I was teaching preschool. And so a lot of these little Korean children would come into my Sunday school class, and they didn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very hard to do a lesson. So I recruited one of the mothers to come, and she translated the lesson for me so that I could teach them, and she and I became friends.
All right.
And then it just kind of grew from there. I got invited to her house. I got invited to, they have what they call blessings in their house, which is like a little church service to either bless a house or to have a birthday or just kind of any event that they do. And so as I got invited to those things, I became more acquainted. I started singing in their choir. They had to write everything out phonetically for me, but yeah. I was singing in their choir. And so I got chosen to be on their board of directors. So it's just kind of grown from that one family that came, 10 years ago probably, to our church. The Chinese church has been with us a lot longer. They started with a member of our church named Ted Lowe, and he and his wife had a Sunday school for the Chinese refugees who came to the country, and that has grown over the years, and I believe now they probably have 50 or 60 people that meet in our fellowship hall on Sunday the same time that we have our service. And again, through my Sunday school teaching, I have met their children, so then I've met their parents, and Friday evenings they have a special dinner that they invite the Chinese college students to come because our church is close to the campus. Mm-hmm. So they come, and then occasionally my husband and I will go and have dinner and sit in on their service. We don't understand a lot of it because it's all done in Chinese, but still, being able to fellowship with them has been really a blessing. The Sudanese are brand new. They've only been worshiping with us for maybe a year or so, and they come in on Sunday evenings, and they have grown. They used to be in one of our smaller classrooms, and now they worship in our fellowship hall because they need the room.
Wow.
So they have grown to a larger group, and they are obviously they're from South Sudan, and they are they worship very loud and very musically, and they dance, and they just have a whole different way of praising God. But we have their minister sometimes plays guitar in on our praise band.
Yeah.
And now we have a couple of the Korean young people who are joining our praise band and play drums and guitar. And so again, it's been a long process of assimilation and trying to work with all these groups to let them feel comfortable and know that we care about them. And anyway, that's a long story, but there it is.
No, it's great. And I think this is a story that our churches need to know about and our listeners need to be aware of. This has not always been an easy task, for sure. It has stretched the congregation of First Baptist immensely. Mm-hmm. And you've been a key part of that being stretched. What have been some personal challenges for you in this process? And then maybe the life of First Baptist, how have they adjusted to these United Nations meeting in their building? Right.
Well, personally, my biggest challenge is the language. Mm-hmm. I am trying to learn Korean, but my old brain just does not do very well at that. When I was in high school, I was taking a whole bunch of foreign languages and never had any problem. And now I'm trying to learn Korean, and it's difficult. So that's probably my biggest challenge, and also to deal with the parents who are concerned because their children are becoming Americanized.
Right.
And to deal with the children to explain to them why their parents are concerned. Does that make sense?
So there's a little bit of a gap
there's-
between the children and their parents because the children want to be more Western?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, they go to our schools and
Yes.
they want to fit in and they want to be, and of course they aren't going to be because they look different.
Right.
If they were from a European country, it would be much easier, but they succumb to bullying and just a whole lot of different things that
That's difficult.
they might not if they didn't look different. I think the challenge for our congregation has been that because we're an older congregation, there aren't a lot of children of our own. The Korean have a lot of children.
Yeah.
So we have had people who had young children leave our church because they said, we don't have any children. We don't have a children's program. Well, we do, but what we don't have is white Anglo-Saxon children.
Right.
And so for the congregation, the difficulty has been trying to deal with prejudice and perception of we have a very large youth group that does all kinds of great stuff, but they are 99% Korean, few Chinese, and so it's been an interesting transition. Those who are in our congregation now embrace those groups, and it's been a road, road that we've had to go down that hasn't been always easy.
So with the youth group then has become, and the Sunday school hour has become a blended kind of experience. This is where the Korean and the First Baptist community and the Chinese community all kind of meet in one place.
Right. And so there's one Sunday school that is middle school and high school, and then I teach kindergarten through 5th grade.
Okay.
And so on any given Sunday, I have Chinese, Korean, Caucasian, a whole mix of people, and as they do in the high school group.
So this is kind of interesting. So you found ways to overlap. You guys meet every once in a while for special events in the evenings, or even you come together. Is it once a month or once a quarter as a joint community for worship?
We're trying to do once a quarter. As a matter of fact, we're doing a joint service on May 20th that will involve all the congregations.
Yeah. And so there's been places of overlap, but there's also been places of unique cultural and language-centric worship. So they still have a Korean worship hour. There's a Sudanese worship hour. There's a Chinese worship time, an English-speaking First Baptist time. But there have been many overlaps. So there's sort of distinct but overlapping congregations. Right.
And, I go to the Korean service. I have a lovely young man who translates for me when I'm at the service.
Okay.
We have several of the Korean who speak pretty good English, and they come to our service. So it's slowly, we're slowly kind of melting, but it's a long process. It's not something that happens overnight, and I think those who expect it to happen overnight are going to be disappointed.
Yeah. And this has been, like you said, it's been a 10-year journey welcoming in these groups, and so it's not always been the easiest road, but you have, by the grace of God, worked through many of your differences and found some common space.
Yeah. Yes. Very much so. Very much so. It's been really good. And I also, there is an office in one of the apartment buildings where I volunteer one day a week, and people come in we make phone calls to doctors. We call Department of Health and Human Services. We read their mail. We write checks for them to pay bills. We do just a variety of things for them that they're, especially if they're fairly newly arrived, would have difficulty with.
Right. So you're part of that assimilation process. You're teaching them how to be actively engaged in their community and pay their bills and get them oriented to life in Lincoln.
Right. Which seems easy to us, but I keep thinking to myself, if I were if I were thrown into a country where I didn't speak the language at all, how would I survive?
Yeah.
It would not be very easy.
Right. And even within the Korean group, but certainly with the Chinese and the Sudanese, some of them are just traditional immigrants, but many of them are refugees because of conflict situations. Would you say this is a reflection of what's going on there at First Baptist?
Right. Yes, absolutely. The Korean and the Sudanese are refugees.
Okay.
Because is that what they're called? I can't even remember. Anyway, they have conflict in their countries.
Sure. Yeah.
The Korean were driven out of Burma into Thailand, and they've been living in refugee camps. Some of them were born there and have grown to adulthood there, but they have emigrated to the United States, and Lincoln seems to be a really comfortable place for them to be.
Yeah.
Because they bring their families, maybe who've emigrated and live in Minnesota or South Dakota or some other state, and then they eventually come to Lincoln.
Yeah.
Because the jobs are here, the people are nice, they are comfortable here.
Yeah.
The Chinese, on the other hand, most of them have come to go to school.
Right.
They have come to the university, they've gotten their doctorates, and a lot of them are scientists, accountants, professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And so their story is different because they are here because they've chosen to come to be educated.
Right. So that's some of the maybe some of the differences between the congregations, and certainly how the ministry is different because you're dealing with people who are intentional immigrants for one reason or another, and then some who are refugees who are escaping conflict. And those sort of things. So those are very different kinds of ministry settings.
Yeah, right. Very much so.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else about that type of ministry you want to share? Anything that we should know?
Well, I think that the more that people get to know refugees and their situations, they find out that they have the same goals and aspirations for their children and for themselves to be able to contribute to society, to be able to work, to have their children have a good education, to have their children be successful. Most of the people who've come here with children, that was their goal. They knew that in the camps they were not going to get the things that they needed for their children to be successful and to be healthy and to be contributors, and so it's a really kind of an eye-opening thing to know that they're really not that much different from we are. They look different, they speak a different language, they eat different food, but they still have those same hopes and aspirations for their lives and the lives of their children.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing about that. I've always enjoyed learning about this type of ministry at First Baptist in Lincoln, and I think this May 20th type services that you guys have is what heaven's going to look like with all the different people groups. Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we sing. The Chinese and the Korean have hymnals that have the same hymns in them that we have. Again, because a lot of them were Baptist to begin with. And so we sing that hymn in 3 different languages.
That's amazing.
And it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
That's great. Well, let's move on to the final question then. What's next? Maybe what's next for First Baptist? What's next for you personally? Maybe for this ministry of multicultural ministry. What's the next thing that's going to take place for you guys?
What's the next thing? Well, we are in transition right now because our pastor left to go to Connecticut to be the regional minister there. And so we have an interim pastor. And so our next step is to just figure out how we continue, where we go, how we call a new pastor. I mean, we're just kind of in an interesting spot right now. And it's interesting, too, because it makes the other congregations nervous because they don't want us to go. They don't want us to not exist anymore because we are kind of their, I I don't know, they need us. They feel like they need us. I'm not sure they do, but they feel like they do. And so we are working through that and trying to figure out how that's going to look for the future. For me personally, I think I will just keep on doing what I'm doing and continuing to try to learn to speak Karen so that and so that I can communicate better. I think when you learn a country's language, you learn a lot about them. One of the things I learned about the Korean language is they have no past, future tense. Everything is present tense. There is no word for you're welcome. You say thank you, and they say thank you back. Okay. So, it's just kind of interesting to learn the language because then you kind of learn how they think, how they survive or whatever. So hopefully learning the Korean language. I would also like to be able to do more preaching and teaching. That kind of is where I think I'm headed, but I'm waiting for God to open some doors.
Amen.
And that's where I am.
Well, that's wonderful. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Give us a Korean hello.
Osuwa means how are you?
All right, Osuwa. And then
for
the end of the podcast, how do you say goodbye?
Let me see. I'm going to say galage, which means good. Galage means good morning.
Good morning.
You say that as hello and goodbye.
Oh, okay. Very good. And then just as a way of saying thank you to you for being a guest on our show, how does that work?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. Well, it's been great talking with Susan Howell today. If our listeners had some questions about your ministry at Lincoln First Baptist Church, if maybe their congregation has a second group meeting in it that speaks another language and they're curious about how to connect those two worlds, could they reach out to you, maybe ask you some questions and kind of hear your story and learn more about how you've worked through that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so how would they reach you?
Well, they can either call the church, and the number there is 402-477-4198.
Okay.
Or they can call me or text me. That might be the best.
Okay.
Because I won't necessarily answer the phone if I don't recognize the number.
Yeah.
So it's 402-416-5112.
Okay, very good. And when you text her to ask these questions, tell her why you're calling and where you learned her number. So
yeah, exactly.
She understands
exactly
what's going on. Well, thank you again so much, Susan. I appreciate you being on the show today.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for listening to Mission in 5, the podcast. Keep tuning in each week as we introduce you to the many ministry leaders, pastors, and church leaders impacting the churches of Nebraska and the larger American Baptist community. Check out the show notes for contact information for Susan Howell and the First Baptist Church of Lincoln. In the show notes, you will also find links to learn more about the Karen and Sudanese people groups, along with a Wikipedia article on the basic information regarding the conflicts in those countries. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast at Podbean, iTunes, and Google Play. While there, be sure to rate and review us so we know how you're enjoying the show. Send us ideas on who you'd like us to interview for future episodes. And as always, feel free to support us by giving through our PayPal link on our ABC Nebraska website, which is just www.abcnebraska.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.